I'm going to start in on the session from the perspective that I'm going to start dealing with theoretical frameworks in a fairly general kind of way. I'm also going to try something that I've never tried before, in the sense that I'm going to go back to grade 9 and use some of the materials that I used when I had my grade 9 starting in on their own investigations. We called them investigations, and in reality they were research, but from an individual or a small group kind of perspective as well. So I'm going to pitch it at the level that seems appropriate for you. Tell me if it does anything for you, or if I can just scrap it for the next time around. I mean, it's not a matter of ego at this point in time. I want it to be helpful. Having said that, how many of you had an opportunity, just show of hands, to take a look at the short video clip that Francois put together a few years back? 1, 2, Joe, you didn't get a chance to take a look at that? No? It was posted in Blackboard.
Oh, I didn't catch that. Sorry.
Okay, you'll have an opportunity to go back and do it now, or after this session. Then it's about what 9 minutes long, 8 minutes long, something like that. It's not too bad, and he goes through it in a diagrammatic kind of fashion. And this is sort of going to be a tie-in to it, but it's a little bit more simplistic than what he actually did, because he was pitching that particular video clip originally for the master's students in the Master of Education program. And if you take a look at the comments that are derived or proceeded from that, the video clip is very well received by an academic audience. In fact, I would say that it has taken on something of a viral kind of perspective, because 43,000 people have taken a look at it over the course of the last 3 years or so. It's a pretty well-received piece of video for what it does, but it is very much geared to a graduate type of audience. So take that in mind, or keep that in mind as you're actually looking at it. All right. So Francois' video clip is shown, and you can take a look at it there. If you want to just copy that down, or Elizabeth has already put it in terms of a clip inside a URL inside the chat line as well. So you can take a look at that later. So I'm going to build on that. And I will admit that this doesn't work the same way as the way that I actually set it up. So there are some animations. If you want the PowerPoint, I will load it into Blackboard, and you can take a look at it there. It actually comes up in 3 different phases. But anyways, I'll deal with it the way that it is at this point in time. So if we look at these as being 3 separate kinds of pieces that we're going to build over time, your theoretical framework should have at least these 3 columns in them. So the first column is the theoretical basis for your investigation work. So what I'd like you to do in that particular piece is, using brief phrases, so just short little pieces, identify the theoretical elements that are underlying your project. So they could be taken from the same theory, or they could be taken from a variety of different theories that are related in some way, shape, or form, at least in your head. Keep in mind that this is just a diagram that's going to be outlining the way that your theory is actually put together. And when you are actually describing this in your own research paper, your report, that your thesis that you're actually going to be putting together, you will describe it in words. But this is a good way of actually just laying it out in a flow kind of mechanism, so that you can actually get the concepts and the way that the concepts are related to each other down in graphical kind of format. So in some ways, this is sort of like a concept map, and I'm going to make reference to that a little bit later. So the first column then is, using brief phrases, identify the theoretical elements underlying your project. So if you're using, I don't know, let's just say activity theory perhaps as the basis, the theory basis for your particular work, then you would talk about elements in activity theory. Anybody who doesn't know anything about activity theory and it doesn't relate to your project, forget about it. Just let it go. But you can put your own theories into there. So if you're using constructivism, perhaps as an example, you might put in elements of ZPD, zone of proximal development, as being those theoretical elements underlying your project. And Elizabeth is going to be using an example from her own dissertation, so you can take a look at what it looks like from her particular work. I didn't actually have a graphic version of that, so I have nothing to show you from my own, but it would look pretty chaotic as well. All right, moving on to the second column then. We actually would need to have some relationship being set up between the theoretical basis and the independent variable or variables, if you're looking at Francois's video clip, that you have chosen. So these are going to be variables that you are going to be manipulating in some way, shape, or form. Now, they could be manipulated from the perspective of you are going to be choosing various pieces out of a document analysis. So in other words, using a document as being the source of your data. So you could actually go about choosing specific portions of the document that become your independent variable. Or these could be something that you are actually going to be doing with individuals who are going to be part of your sample as you go through an experimental design, experimental used very, very loosely in this particular instance. Whatever it is, you are going to be specifically choosing these particular variables and then manipulating them in some way, shape, or form. Now, the other stipulation that we have to put on in between these is that they need to be stated in a way that's measurable in some way, shape, or form. Now, measurable could be quantitative. Remember last week when we talked about quantitative and qualitative? Or it could be qualitative. And I've got some examples for that when we get to the next slide. And you also have to have a relationship between the theoretical basis and your independent variables. In other words, you have to identify, describe, and that's what the arrow up above is trying to actually say, between the theoretical basis of your work and the independent variables that you have chosen. Now, if you remember what I said last week, it is better for you to actually have one independent variable. Otherwise, you will have huge difficulties in terms of determining which of the independent variables is having which effect. So it's always better to have simplicity in terms of an individual independent variable that you are going to be manipulating. And most of the time, most researchers will have one independent variable. They may have different confirmations of it, but they'll usually only have one independent variable that they're manipulating. It's only the real bright ones around who actually have multiple independent variables, because for some reason the rest of us can't handle the complexity that happens. And there's good reason for that as well. The dependent variables then follow from that. So the third column that we're talking about is the dependent variable side of this. That is, what is actually going to change as a result of your manipulations of the independent variable. And normally you would have one or two or sometimes three of these dependent variables that are tied very closely to the independent variables. So the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable is very, very closely described as well. And usually that relationship is described in terms of your hypothesis. So you'll say something to this effect, and I don't know if this is going to grab you. If you change the independent variable in some way, shape, or form, then the dependent variable or variables will change in some way, shape, or form because, and you'll give some kind of an explanation. So that is both the predictive piece of a hypothesis as well as the explanatory piece of a hypothesis, which together makes up theory. So those two pieces are part of the theoretical structure of what you're doing. So you might want to look at these kinds of things, and I'll just give you some examples. So if we take a look at the examples that are given on this page, and keep in mind that this is taken from the physical sciences at a very simplistic kind of level, but hopefully it'll be of some use to you. So the experiment in this particular instance, and this is just an example, is taking a look at the effect of plant health on by steadily increasing temperatures that the plants are being exposed to. So in this particular case, what's the independent variable? Well, we're going to manipulate the temperature. So we're steadily increasing the temperatures. And what is the dependent variable in this particular case? Well, generally stated, it's plant health. So the research question that could be derived as a result of this could be something along the lines of, how does temperature of plants grown in affect the health of the plant? Something like that. It probably should be an E rather than an A, but anyways. And the hypothesis, if the temperature is increased, then the plant will become unhealthy because the plants will dry up, or something along those lines. Keep in mind that this is grade 9 science. So we take a look at the variations for the cause variable or the independent variable, and notice that we're using very set intervals for the temperature increases. We're going from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20, 25, 35, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50 degrees, and we're using incubators as a means of actually determining what that temperature is. And then we say something about each plant should be in one container at one temperature, using 5 plants. And the repetition is kind of interesting as well. Normally, what we would do in educational circles is actually have more than one individual who is going to be exposed to a particular treatment or a particular increment that you're actually going to be dealing with in your independent variable. Take a look at the result variables, though. So we can see that the cause or the independent variables are very specifically measured, and that's by temperature that we're actually exposing them to. And the result variables are the dependent variables. In this particular case, remember that our overall variable, the dependent variable, is plant health. So we're going to measure that by taking a look at 2 things: plant mass, which is going to be quantitative, and the greenness of leaves. And the greenness of leaves is going to be qualitative, because it's going to be measured against some standard. In fact, I actually show how that could be done in some way, shape, or form. You could actually do this according to going into your local Color Your World and getting a sample of green paint samples from Color Your World, and they are already set up in a gradient of colors, etc., and you could just use those as being your standard against which you're actually going to measure the greenness of your leaves, etc. So again, I don't know if that works for you, but does that give you sort of a sense as to how you might go about setting up the variations in your independent variable and then the variations in your dependent variable? Go ahead, Elizabeth.